much we've been funded? Is it through November? And then also, if you could just expand on what do you think the government should do as far as this vote coming up? That, should we reopen without these protections for the healthcare?
Well, a couple things. One, SNAP has been ordered to be fully funded and on a going forward basis, and we're going to continue to act accordingly, and DTA is ready with a vendor to continue to process benefits for which people are eligible. So SNAP is fully funding. Again, SNAP beneficiaries, make sure you go out and buy the food that you need to feed your families. Look, I'm glad that government reopened. I am very distressed and concerned that that happened without securing any effort to make sure that we were preventing healthcare costs from skyrocketing around this country. What needs to happen now is Republicans and the president need to get back together in Congress and work through a vote to make sure that these tax credits are extended so that people have health insurance, so that they don't come December see their health insurance go away. People in America, people in Massachusetts can't afford to see their family budget go up by $25,000 a year to pay for health care coverage. So they need to act immediately to take steps to prevent skyrocketing health care costs in Massachusetts and around this country.
Hey everyone, welcome back to 45th Perspective, the channel where we take a step back from the noise and dig into the deeper meaning behind America's political moments. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and if you'd like to support what we do, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/45thperspective for as little as $5 a month. Every bit helps us keep producing thoughtful, independent analysis like this.
How much do you blame the 8 Dems who crossed over, including the 2 New Hampshire senators?
Oh, there's no blame here. I mean, look, it's the Republicans who've been out of session. Mike Johnson has only called them in 12 out of the last 120 days. I mean, they're not even in D.C. to do the work. So I hope they get back there now, work with their Democratic colleagues, and that the president do what he needs to do and do his job, because right now it's chaos. I don't know how much more the American people can take, okay? The president promised that he was going to lower costs. Grocery costs are higher than ever. He has done nothing but create chaos and uncertainty, from what's happening in the skies to, things not functioning on the ground. Look at all the federal workers who've been laid off. Here in Massachusetts, I can tell you we've had hundreds of federal workers apply for unemployment insurance. We had federal workers who never contemplated going to a food pantry line up at Massachusetts food pantries this weekend. This is Donald Trump. This is the world he's created. I hope he takes a read from the election results last week, which really were a rejection of his failed economic policies, and that he start to step up and do what's right by the American people. And, I really hope that happens.
So, today we're going to unpack a recent Senate hearing that sparked a lot of discussion across the country. The hearing focused on government funding, the reopening after the shutdown, and one of the biggest issues still hanging in the balance, rising healthcare costs and the fight over extending federal tax credits for health insurance. It's a topic that cuts across party lines because, at the end of the day, everyone feels the effects of higher grocery prices, healthcare premiums, and political dysfunction. Now, if you caught the clips circulating online, you probably saw the governor's passionate comments, both on the relief that the government finally reopened and on her frustration that it happened without securing healthcare protections for working families. She pointed out that while the shutdown may have ended, the economic uncertainty it caused, especially for federal workers, isn't something that disappears overnight. So let's start by breaking down what this hearing was really about, what both sides had to say, and why this seemingly procedural issue about funding actually says a lot about where the country is headed, economically, politically, and morally. In other words, how long the government can continue paying for programs like SNAP, Medicaid, and federal salaries before Congress has to vote again. In this case, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, was confirmed to be fully funded. That's good news for millions of low-income families who rely on it to put food on the table. But even with that reassurance, the hearing took a sharp turn toward a much bigger concern: healthcare. The governor was direct. She said she was distressed that the reopening of the government happened without securing a commitment to extend healthcare tax credits. For context, These are the credits that help lower and middle-income Americans afford health insurance through the Affordable Care Act marketplace. If those credits expire, families could see their insurance premiums jump dramatically, by thousands of dollars a year. The governor warned that some families might end up paying $25,000 more annually just to keep their coverage. That's a staggering figure. Now, that's not just a talking point. Economists have been warning for months that if Congress doesn't act to renew those credits, healthcare costs could skyrocket, especially for people who are just above the threshold for Medicaid eligibility but still can't afford private insurance. For them, these credits aren't a luxury. They're the difference between having coverage and going without it. From a policy standpoint, this is where things get complicated. Supporters of extending the tax credits, mostly Democrats, argue that healthcare is a fundamental necessity, that the government has a moral responsibility to make sure people don't go bankrupt from getting sick. They point to the record-high costs of healthcare in the U.S., where even insured Americans often struggle with deductibles and surprise bills. On the other hand, critics, mostly Republicans, argue that these tax credits are just another way of expanding government dependency. They say the credits distort the insurance market, drive up costs in the long run, and burden taxpayers with billions in additional spending. From their perspective, the solution isn't more federal aid but market reforms, creating competition, reducing regulation, and letting supply and demand set prices. This tension, between providing social protection and maintaining fiscal discipline, is at the heart of almost every major political battle in Washington right now. And what this hearing revealed is how far apart both sides still are, even after the shutdown ended. The governor didn't hold back in her criticism of Republican leadership. She specifically pointed to House Speaker Mike Johnson, saying he'd only called the House into session 12 times in the last 120 days. Her message was clear. Congress isn't doing its job. She said, "They're not even in D.C. to do the work." That's a strong accusation, and it reflects a growing frustration not just among Democrats, but among ordinary Americans watching the dysfunction play out. But she didn't stop there. She went further, linking the current crisis to what she called chaos created by Donald Trump. She argued that under Trump's influence, the Republican Party has become more about obstruction than governance. She pointed to real-world effects. Grocery prices higher than ever, federal workers laid off, and people lining up at food pantries. Not because they mismanaged their finances, but because the federal government literally stopped paying them during the shutdown. Now, here's where I think it's worth taking a step back. The governor's comments obviously came from a place of frustration, and to be fair, it's hard to blame her. When hundreds of thousands of federal employees suddenly stop receiving paychecks, that has ripple effects through the entire economy, especially in states with a high concentration of federal workers like Massachusetts, where this hearing took place. But at the same time, this isn't a one-sided story. Yes, Republicans have been slow to act, and yes, there's an undeniable level of chaos coming from the House right now. But Democrats aren't entirely off the hook either. There's been infighting within their own ranks about how to approach these negotiations. Some moderate Democrats have crossed party lines on key votes, sometimes out of political calculation, sometimes out of genuine disagreement. In fact, the governor was asked about that directly, how much she blames the 8 Democrats who sided with Republicans in recent votes. Her answer was telling. She said, "There's no blame here." Instead, she shifted the focus back to Republican leadership, saying the real issue is that the GOP has been absent from the legislative process. Still, her answer didn't quite address the underlying frustration within her own party. Many Democrats feel that when members cross over, even on procedural votes, it weakens their leverage and sends mixed signals to voters. And that brings us to the deeper issue: governing in an era of division. The immediate issue on the table was federal funding. Every time there's a shutdown or a funding crisis, it's like déjà vu. The parties blame each other, the same soundbites are repeated, and the public loses a little more faith in Washington's ability to function. The truth is, these shutdowns don't hurt politicians nearly as much as they hurt ordinary people. Federal workers lose pay. Families on SNAP or housing assistance start worrying if their benefits will stop. Small businesses that depend on government contracts start laying off workers. The economy slows down, not in abstract terms, but in very real, human ways. That's why hearings like this matter. They're not just about policy, they're about accountability. They show us whether the people we elect are actually doing the work to solve problems or just using those problems as ammunition for political theater. Now, to be fair to the Republicans' argument, some conservatives believe that the only way to force a conversation about runaway spending is through moments like this, moments of brinkmanship. They argue that without a hard stop, Washington will never confront the unsustainable growth of federal debt. That's not an entirely unreasonable concern. The national debt is over $30 trillion, and interest payments alone are eating into programs that actually help people. But the counterpoint is, if your method of controlling spending causes federal workers to go hungry or families to lose health coverage, then the cure starts looking worse than the disease. The governor's statement reflected that view. She said plainly, "I don't know how much more the American people can take." And that line struck me, because beyond the politics, there's fatigue, a kind of national exhaustion with seeing the same crisis recycled every few months. Think about what she described. Federal workers lining up at food pantries, people applying for unemployment because the government they serve can't pay them. It's a stark image, and whether you agree with her politics or not, it's hard to deny the emotional weight of that. These are people who, in theory, represent the backbone of the government, doing the work that keeps things running even when politicians are busy fighting. What's interesting is how she connected that economic suffering to political accountability. She said she hoped Donald Trump would take a read from the election results, a reference to the most recent midterm and local elections, where several candidates aligned with Trump's wing of the Republican Party underperformed. Her argument is that those results were a rejection of chaos, a signal that Americans, even many conservatives, are tired of dysfunction and want leaders who can actually govern. Now, whether that interpretation is entirely accurate is debatable. Political analysts have pointed out that while Trump-aligned candidates struggled in some races, the Republican base remains strong and motivated. But the broader point stands. Americans are frustrated. They want stability, they want predictability, and they want leaders who spend less time scoring points and more time solving problems. What this hearing captured, in many ways, is a snapshot of that tension. On one side, a call for action, extend healthcare protections, keep families covered, protect the vulnerable. On the other, a demand for fiscal restraint, don't keep writing blank checks, don't expand federal reach. Both sides make valid points, but both also fall into traps. Democrats risk sounding like they're promising everything without explaining how to pay for it. Republicans risk sounding like they're willing to break the system to save it. And in between those extremes are the rest of us, Americans who just want the government to work. If you've watched 45th Perspective for a while, you know I try to avoid pure partisanship. I think it's more productive to ask, what are the trade-offs here? What's the cost of doing nothing versus the cost of acting too aggressively? In this case, the cost of inaction is clear: higher healthcare costs, lost coverage, and an unstable economy. But the cost of endless government spending is also real: debt, inflation, and dependency that future generations will have to manage. That's why I think hearings like this, as messy as they can be, are still necessary. They force the conversation out into the open. They let us see how leaders handle pressure, how they explain complex issues to the public, and how they respond when the stakes are high. But I'll say this. I wish more politicians approached these hearings the way the governor did, with a mix of policy awareness and emotional clarity. Whether you agree with her or not, she didn't speak in sound bites. She spoke in human terms. She talked about families, workers, and the real cost of political dysfunction. And that's something Washington desperately needs more of. Let's also talk about SNAP, since that was part of the hearing's focus. The governor confirmed that SNAP is fully funded and encouraged beneficiaries to go out and buy the food they need. That might seem like a small thing, but for many families, it's a lifeline. During the shutdown, food pantries across the country reported surges in demand because people weren't sure if their benefits would continue. So even that reassurance matters. It restores a bit of confidence, at least in one area. But it also highlights a strange contradiction in our political culture. We're the wealthiest nation in the world, and yet every few months we're debating whether the government can afford to feed its poorest citizens. That's not just an economic question. It's a moral one. And I think that's what the governor was really getting at, even if she didn't say it explicitly. When she talked about the chaos and uncertainty created by the current administration, she was really talking about something deeper. A lack of trust that the system will protect people when it's supposed to. Now, if you're watching this and thinking, both sides are to blame, you're not wrong. This is not a story with clear heroes and villains. There are legitimate reasons for Republicans to worry about spending. There are legitimate reasons for Democrats to push for stronger social protections. The real problem is that both sides have become so locked into their talking points that compromise feels almost impossible. That's what makes hearings like this feel so exhausting but also so important. Because once in a while, when the cameras are rolling and the questions get tough, we catch a glimpse of what governing could look like. If people focused on solving problems instead of scoring wins. So what happens next? The immediate task for Congress is to pass a bill that extends the healthcare tax credits before they expire. If they fail to do that, premiums will rise and millions could lose coverage. That, in turn, could increase the number of uninsured Americans for the first time in years, a reversal of progress made since the Affordable Care Act was passed. But beyond that, the bigger question is whether this moment will spark any kind of meaningful reform. Can lawmakers agree on a more stable, long-term funding process so we're not facing shutdown threats every few months? Can they reform healthcare in a way that controls costs without abandoning vulnerable people? Those are the real tests ahead. And maybe, just maybe, this hearing will serve as a reminder that the stakes aren't abstract, they're human. When the governor talked about federal workers applying for unemployment or going to food pantries, she wasn't using hypotheticals. Those are real people with families, mortgages, and bills. They don't care which party wins the shutdown fight. They just want to know they'll be okay. That's something we should all be able to agree on. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought. Politics often gets reduced to sides. Left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. But the truth is, governance is about balance. It's about finding the line between compassion and responsibility, between protection and productivity. This hearing, for all its tension, was a reminder of that delicate balance, and of how easily it can tip when partisanship takes over. So, what do you think? Should the government prioritize extending those healthcare tax credits, even if it means adding to federal spending? Or should it hold the line on fiscal discipline, even if some families lose coverage? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, but please, keep it respectful. These are complex issues that deserve serious conversation, not just slogans. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who cares about understanding the bigger picture behind the headlines. And again, if you want to support thoughtful, independent content like this, head over to patreon.com/45thperspective. You can join our community for as little as $5 a month. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious, stay informed, and keep looking for the story behind the story. I'll see you in the next one.